Hey everyone, welcome back to the channel. This is FrSky Steve. And why is there a picture of a very scared man getting a trim at the barber? It's because we're talking about trims and he's scared straight. And so it's an intervention. This is something that happened to me a few years ago. It's one of those things that I think it's kind of nice to pay forward, even though you got to be careful how we talk to people, especially when it comes off looking like you know more than they do. People can get turned off a little bit, but if they're receptive, like this one guy was with me, did me the favor, I found it to be extremely helpful. So I was a guy who just loved flying, right? But what I would do is I would always hold back the back elevator, the stick on the elevator, pull it down a little bit so it kept the nose up, and kept trying to prevent the plane from going rolling left, rolling right. So essentially, what I was doing throughout the flight was managing the flight. I was not managing. I was managing the plane and preventing it from crashing. So the entire flight was one goal in mind, which was don't crash. And that's not the most enjoyable way to fly. So what this guy did is he said, all right, take the plane about 3 mistakes high. And by the way, don't crash. Whatever you do, save your plane. But at the same time, get it up 3 mistakes high, and then we're going to have you let go of the stick, and then we're going to see what the plane does. So yeah, true to form, let go of the stick, the plane starts diving toward the ground. And he said, okay, you need some elevator trim. And so he said, wherever your hand is, so if you're holding the elevator back, use your trims. Just push down in that same direction where you're holding the elevator down, and that will help keep the nose up. And son of a bitch, it worked great. And then we worked on the roll, and we were able to fix that as well. Then after, this plane was horribly out of trim to begin with, but essentially, once I got understood, like, hey, this is a really nice way to fly this plane. I'm not fighting it the entire flight, and this is actually quite enjoyable. That's when things got better. And so these are the kind of things that I think that we can really help other people at the field with. It's a little uncomfortable first. That's why it's called scared straight. But once we get going with it, it's pretty straightforward. We're going to talk about trims today, and we're going to talk about review it all, because it's not necessarily the most obvious things when it comes to trims. However, this is really one of the strongest features of Ethos. The ability to go in there and do a lot of excellent trim work. And even though we are talking about AETR aileron elevator, throttle rudder, for some reason it's set up as RETA, RETA. And anyways, that's just one of the oddities, I think, with Ethos. But we're going to talk about elevators first. And you get this screen, and it doesn't have a lot of explanation. Range, 25%. Steps, fine. Mode, easy mode, audio on. Okay, what do those 4 things mean? First thing, range. Range is straightforward and simple. That is the total amount. Range, let's say you have 100% travel on your stick, right? What you could do at most is have 25% by default. So when you do the trims, the most you can trim up or trim down on the elevator is 25%, and after that it doesn't do anything. It says max trim reached, right? And when you get to that level, you don't have a plane that's out of trim. You have a plane that's really badly out of trim, and what it really deserves is mechanical trim, which means you have to go back and readjust the control surfaces so that the plane doesn't want to go into the stratosphere or try to crash into the ground. You get that as close to flying straight and level as possible for the elevator at 40% throttle. The 25% range should be more than enough. You do not go up to 100%. It really limits, it would limit how much you can go in either direction if you use 100%. So let's say you had 100% down. It means you can't pull back on the stick any further, because it's always going to be pulling the stick back as far as possible. And once again, if you did something like that, it means that you have a control surface that is completely set up wrong. Okay, So that's what that does. I wanted to show you, I actually went into rudders and I set it up at 10%. The reason being is if your tail's straight, you should be no more than a few degrees off with your rudder from your vertical stabilizer. If it's more than a few degrees off, chances are it's something like a tail that got bent, especially if it's like a foam plane or one of those planes that, I don't know, got warped somehow on the fuselage. But other than that, 10% in my book is maximum. You don't need to change it. You can keep it at 25% defaults, but if you wanted to, that's an option to set it down to something lower. Okay, so we talked about range. The next thing is steps, and essentially I wanted to show you, I'm going to work at the highest one first. So I set up a custom one, and what this means is every time I click the trim, it's going to move the elevator 5%, which is a lot. I mean, a lot. But that's an option, which means that you would get 5 full clicks before you got to 25%. So if you want to do drastic changes very quickly, that's the way to do it. Usually you don't want it that much, and you can take this down to something like maybe 2% or 1%, right? So every time you would get 25 clicks here, you get about 12 clicks here at 2%. And then this other one here called exponential. And expo, you might remember from things like you're giving aileron expo, means that when you start clicking on it, at first it doesn't do very much, but then after a while it will start to do a lot, right? There's no way for us to put a number in for expo on this. It's just one of the options. Not exactly sure what the curve looks like. And then the rest of these are things from like extra fine all the way up to coarse. And I fly not huge planes, but medium-sized planes, and coarse to me kind of makes the most sense. It feels like it does something every time I press the trim tab down, and there are times where you might actually want something like extra fine, especially if you're flying a sub-microplane where each movement of the control surface might be kind of drastic, so you want as little movement as possible with each click, and extra fine is the way to do it. Okay, so the last one is this whole thing of disabling trims, and I have 2 good reasons why you would want to disable trims. The first one is that when you are, for example, training somebody, and when we talk about trainers, we talk about setting up a real basic model, but sometimes there's some clubs that do a wonderful job of training kids. And someone comes up and talks to the instructor, and the kid gets bored and he fidgets with stuff and he starts pushing buttons when the instructor's not paying attention, and possibility of pushing the trim buttons is pretty high and throwing the plane out of trim when the student has it, and it's kind of hard to diagnose. So if you go in and you disable it, what that means is that the trims and everything else about the plane is left to the instructor. So the student is essentially flying the instructor's trim as opposed to putting their own trim on top of it. That's one reason I would use that. The other one would be if you're flying with a flight controller like iNav, where it has trim set up in the software. You want to disable trims on the transmitter. Okay, so we got this all handled. We go back to course. This is my favorite. Flight modes. Now, this is something that is really strong. And keep in mind, each one of these, when I'm talking about every one of these, like, for example, rudder, you can do this as well. They can go in independent trims for flight mode. So you could do this for all of them. You could do it for just one control surface. The idea is that we have this thing called flight modes, and what they are, the best way to describe it, there's a takeoff flight mode. Like, let's just say, here's a practical example. You have a takeoff flight mode, you have a high rate flight mode, low rate flight mode, and a landing flight mode. So 4 different flight modes. The idea is that you can set up independent trims for each flight mode. For example, when you have landing gear come down, all of a sudden it might start doing something like it might start pushing the nose down or up, depending what you're doing, and you might want to trim it so that you keep the plane flying level as the landing gear is deployed. So I think most likely it would start pulling the nose down. But anyway, so you can go in there and you can set trims just for that. So maybe all you worry about is on the elevator. Maybe it's just everything else is fine, but the nose starts coming down a little bit. And you can go in there and give it a little trim. So when you go into that landing flight mode, all of a sudden you don't have to go through and retrim the whole plane once again. Well, the master trim is instead of having to worry about the landing gear coming down, is the best way to describe it, I should say. Instead of worrying about that nose starting to dip, what you can do is you can have it so when you go into flight modes, it's already accounted for this dip in the nose, and the trim has been set to take that out of the equation. Okay, so when you are in easy mode, that means one trim fits all. So whichever flight mode you're in, the trim is going to be the same for everything. And then there's another one here called custom, and then you have these things where you add behaviors and stuff. And Jose has a really good video on this, and he has ways to explain it. It's actually kind of interesting because it's kind of a combination of both. You're kind of borrowing the trims from a previous flight mode and apply them to another flight mode, and then you're adding on top of that. So, for example, let's say you have your trims set up perfectly for high rates, and then you take the plane, you put it into the low rates, and maybe you just all the trims are perfect, but you just want to do a little fine tuning. You can do that in custom, and then you could turn them all the way off, so there are no modes whatsoever. So it's like, I guess it's the same as disabling the trim. Anyway, I typically use independent for flight mode or easy mode depending on how the plane is set up. And the last thing is audio. Alright, so we've gone through all the trims. We've talked about what all this menu does. I'm going to get out of this throttle. Okay, now we close it all down. And then there's these thing called T5 and T6, and the idea behind that, I'm going to show you a practical example of it. So if you have something like one of the X18s, all the X18s have a T5 and T6. Those are trim 5 and trim 6 tabs. So you look on the transmitter, you'll count the number of trims you should have. There should be 6 of them altogether instead of the standard 4. If you have an X20S or X20, you only have 4. And if you have an X14 and twin light and everything else, you only have 4. So, but it's a beautiful thing when you have this and you're thinking to yourself, okay, you can do all the things that we just described, but why would I need that? And it's because I'm going to talk to you about doing something very practical. So, again, I'm talking from the world of motif flyer, like myself. I think a lot of people are mode 2 flyers, but I've met quite a few guys who are mode 1. So if you're flying mode 2, for example, like myself, your right hand is always busy, and the last thing you want to do is take your fingers off the stick and go find the trim button. So what you do a lot of the times is you have one of your buddies, hey, give me 3 clicks down elevator. And so you kind of shout out orders to them, right? And then they do that, and they're like, okay, that's cool. Let's do one better than that. So we have this thing called cross trims, and what this is you can see the rudder. I keep the rudder the same. So the left stick is perfect. Elevator, trim elevator. So the right stick, okay, so the elevator, that's the same. Throttle, wait a minute. I went from throttle to trim elevator. Why? It's because I tend to fly a lot of electric planes, and electric planes do not need, typically don't need throttle trim. So what I did is I moved the throttle trim, I replaced it with elevator trim. But you're like, wait a minute, you have an elevator trim for where it normally is, and then you have one on the other side now too. Which one works? They both work, and they both work the same. So you move one, it's like moving move one is the same as moving either one. They just do the trims for you. Stick aileron. So again, that's on the right stick. It is aileron on the left stick. I put T5 as trim aileron. So it's one of those available trims on the left stick where I can go put my hand down there and I can find it and easily trim the ailerons from the left stick, as opposed to trying to find it while holding the right onto the right stick. So it's a beautiful thing. And I didn't touch T6 because that's on the right side, and there's really not a big point of doing that, because I'm trying to do as little as possible with trims on the right hand. I want everything to be on the left hand where it's free and available to do trimming. Once you start playing with this, you are addicted, because it just makes trimming so much easier, and it's just a really great way to trim your plane. But there's one better. I mean, I know you're saying, Steve, baby, listen, you've done enough for me already. I'm excited about this whole thing with the cross trims. I'm so thankful I'm on FrSky. This is great. We've done enough today. But no, I'm going to do a bit more, because I give, never take. That's what we're going to do for you today. We got this thing, it's this button right here. It's called Instant Trim. And I have it set up in SJ with the down arrow. And what the heck is that? Well, it's one of those two buttons on the back. It's actually the one on the left. It's, if you feel behind your radio, you'll feel on the left side, you feel a little button. There's also one on the right side as well. And when it's down like this, it means it has to be pushed in, because this is that momentary button, right? And when I push it in, I activate this thing called Instant Trim. So actually I used this today. I had a plane that and it was a flying wing, and I had balsa ailerons on there, and somehow they got damaged. And I said, okay, I'm going to rebuild this. And I headed out for its remain flight today. And I took it up, and it was, not flying super well. And it was wanting to dip down to one side, so it was trying to roll left, and of course let go of the sticks, and it was wanting to crash to the ground. And what I did is I got it up. So this is how you work with this. You get it up to about 40% throttle, and I get about 3 mistakes high. And all I do is just fly the plane level. Get the plane flying as level as possible. It doesn't matter where your fingers are on the sticks. I pushed the button, and it said trim center, and then I let go of the sticks. Aileron, elevator, everything trimmed. Even if it had a rudder, the rudder would be trimmed as well. So I let go of it. The plane is trimmed. One push of a button does it all. And I think I went back later on and gave maybe one click for aileron, but that was about it. This was pretty darn close to perfect, and it is absolutely one of the strongest features. This came out in Ethos 1.5 about a year ago, and it is something that when you work with this, you are really going to be in heaven working with it. And with that, I think we've covered trims all the way from start to finish. Look at all this. We covered quite a bit today. I do thank you for watching. If you have any questions, please leave them in the comments. Take care.